This is the Anything Goes with Jackson Neill podcast. Welcome back to the Anything Goes podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Neill. Today's guest is Adam Halliday talking about his latest EP, About a Girl, for episode number 136 of the podcast. Before we jump into the interview, though, just want to remind everyone that this podcast is available on all of your favorite platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, SoundCloud, basically wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure to rate and subscribe so you get the new episodes every single Tuesday and Thursday. So back on November 15th, Adam released his EP, About a Girl, and it does that great job of mixing that new pop R&B kind of sound on it. I really enjoyed listening to it. He's Murda Beats' newest signee, so he already has a major co-sign, and he's making some great music. He grew up splitting time between Philadelphia and the UK. I talked with him about what that was like, and also his journey out to Los Angeles, because he dropped out of college and just went out to LA. Didn't really tell his parents fully before he made that decision, and I just talked with him about how they reacted, how he was able to convince them. And now, after several years out there in LA, whether it was couch surfing or doing whatever he had to do, sleeping in the studio, he's finally really making a name for himself and releasing some really, really good music. We touch on all of that in this interview. So, let's get started. Can you tell me a little bit about this EP, About a Girl?
Yeah, I mean, it's a piece that's super personal to me. You know, it took probably about 8 to 12 months to get everything put together and get everything sounding how we liked it. But I just really wanted to make a digestible, full piece of art. A nice body of work instead of going single by single, that type of thing. And this sort of all just seemed right. And when the records finally fell into place, I sort of knew it had to come out into the world. So, I'm happy that it was the first release.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And with this being your first release, I guess I want to go more into that recording process. Just take me through it. When did it start? What was that like?
Well, it was pretty spanned out. I mean, I was working with these producers, my boys Kojo and the homie Nikki Quinn. This was probably 18 months ago now, maybe a year ago now, and I was just out in LA just writing for pitch and trying to place, trying to place records just on the hustle, and I would go over with them, and with them it was more just a natural cook-up. It wasn't really we were trying to write for pitch or write to brief or for any type of artist like that. We were just trying to make good vibes, and we had an awesome couple of weeks where I think we did February 2nd, Falls Down, and Go Girl, all in the same sort of span of a month. And then the records kind of sat around for a little while. They didn't really do too much. I just knew that they were for me and they weren't for anyone else. So they never got sent out for pitch or anything like that. And then sort of when the opportunity came around to put some music out, I went in search of, a little distro or something or other like that, because I didn't really want to sign a label deal. Those were the first ones I thought of, and then Trippin' and Miss America sort of seemed like the right complement to those guys as well. So yeah, those records were actually done a little while ago. But yeah, I knew I was holding on to them for some reason. I just didn't know what. And sort of, now I'm glad that I trusted my gut.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you started this, you didn't even go into it thinking, oh, these records are going to be on my debut EP. You just kind of were making them and saying, oh, I just want these. I'll figure out the plan later.
Yeah, I had no idea. I wasn't even necessarily planning at the time that I did them to put stuff out. I think I was still trying to just sort of find my way in the industry and write and place records and sort of figuring out my own artistry a little bit. I didn't even know that I was going to drop some music, and then 6 months, 8 months go by, and I began to sort of transition my efforts from writing and pitching to really wanting to do my own thing. And I think when I did them, I knew that I was it was a sound. I was cultivating a certain sound. But yeah, when I did them, it was definitely not this is going to go on the project. They just sort of they just sort of fell into place, and it was nice, and it wasn't, I didn't have to put that much effort into stressing about things. You know what I mean? It was pretty natural. So it was always once I decided to go for it, it was always those 3 songs were always gonna be included.
Definitely. So over the course of that time, when you're thinking about, okay, I want to release this music on my own. I don't want to just write for other people. Was there a specific moment? Was there a specific time where you really said, look, I'm going to release this music as myself? What was that kind of decision making process like?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, like I was out here like just working and grinding, and I ended up meeting. You begin to climb the ladder a little bit, and eventually, I ended up doing a record that Murder heard. And so I went in, I met with him, and then we went in. This is probably like a year ago, around the similar time as I was telling you before, as Go Girl and Falls Down and fucking February 2nd were made. I linked up with Murder, and we just started writing a whole bunch, and we started trying to play some records, and we just weren't really catching anything, but I knew we were making good music, and so did he. And we ended up having a conversation at one point. He was like, "Look, bro, like, fuck the writing thing. Like, you gotta put this shit out. We're making an artist project." So my tune kind of switched, probably about a year ago, and I think I was trying to be logical, and I was waiting for someone to tell me that, so I could sort of tell myself that, you know what I mean. And then from that point on, we started cooking up. Me and Murder made like a whole tape, and we were looking for sort of like a label to shop it around to. That we had a couple of things that ended up falling through, but I knew that once I'd had that conversation with him, I flipped the switch in my mind. I was like, all right, I gotta go get this.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you may be thinking about it yourself, but sometimes you need that kind of outside validation or outside someone else saying you should do this. And I mean, having Murder say that to you was a pretty good outside person saying to you, release your own music, man.
Yeah, it was good of him. He sort of like, he could see that I was trying to just, I was sleeping at the studio and shit. Like I didn't have shit really, but he could see that I was trying to be sort of rational about everything. I think he helped me take the shackles off a little bit and say, nah, I'm not, people need to hear this.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and I kind of want to go into that relationship a little bit more with he's an accomplished producer. What's it been like to have someone like him in your corner? What have you maybe learned from him? What has he taught you about this music industry and just making music in general?
I mean, I learned a lot. I learned a lot from him. I mean, obviously we play 2 different roles in the studio. He's a producer, and he's actually a super capable writer as well, and is often sort of throwing in lyric ideas and melody ideas and things like that. He just likes to cook up and create, But yeah, I learned a lot from him. I think more just like how to navigate the industry. You know what I mean? Like this place is like it's like the Wild West out here. You know what I mean? So sort of how to carry yourself and how to treat others and yeah, I think it's more for me for Murder. The most thing I learned was like how to communicate, how to be a professional, and then how to work hard. I mean, I think the first time that me and Murder ever went to the studio, we locked out Paramount. I think we were in there for like 18 hours, and we did like 9 records. And I was like, holy shit, like we just didn't stop. And I was like, okay, you think you're working hard before, like, nah, you gotta go all the way in. So yeah, he taught me how to conduct myself, but also how to work. I mean, no one spends as much time in the studio as that man, for sure.
Yeah, it's one thing to say like, oh, you're working hard, but then to see one of these really acclaimed producers and see just how hard they work. Like you said, they're 18 hours. I mean, that's intense. That is the work ethic required. You realize is really up there.
Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, and we did the 18, went back, fell asleep, got up, and went to the studio the next night for another 10 or some shit like that. So, but I mean, I was fortunate because even in me initially meeting Murder, I think I was at the studio when I first came out here. I linked up with a couple of homies who were doing really well. The homie Rasul and the homie Soko, who had a couple of good cuts and everything like that. And they kind of like, Soko especially, he had a studio. He kind of took me under his wing a little bit. So I was just there 24/7. And I remember like the first time, like, Rasul pulled up to the studio at like midnight or something like that. We ended up doing this song called Relate. And then, Rasul pulled up to the studio at like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. after like a night out. And I was about to leave. So I was like, fuck it, I'll stay. We ended up doing this song called Relate. And he's like, I'm about to send this to Murder right now. I didn't even know he was working with Murder at the time. And then he sort of sent it off. I remember we sat around waiting for like 20, 30 minutes. And it was probably like 4 o'clock in the morning at that time. And Murder hadn't answered him. So Rasul was like, it's, it probably wasn't the one, blah, blah, blah. So then Rasul leaves. I decided to, like, because I was already up, I decided to stay up. And then I think I did one more song with Soko. And then Rasul called me back at like 5 o'clock in the morning. He was like, yo, are you still at the studio? I was like, yeah. And he was like, yeah, I just got off the phone with Murder. He thinks it's crazy. We got to finish it. So we came back, wrote a second verse. Ended up leaving the studio at like 6 a.m. And I met Murder the next week. And, the week after that, I was in the club with Drake. It was like, it was wild. So I sort of proved to myself, like, I almost left at midnight before Rasul got there. So that would have never happened. You know what I mean? So I'd almost proved to him, like, that was a kick in the mental for me. It's just like, you stay. You know what I mean? You just don't. You stay. You don't leave. You do one more song. And I sort of follow that mantra. You know what I mean? Always now.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's like, the right place and the right time, but also creating your own luck. It's like by you deciding to work harder, you put yourself in the right spot to where something like that could happen. And it's through your work ethic that you're able to kind of create that luck and opportunity for yourself.
Yeah. And that, like, when that happened, I was like, oh shit. Okay. I almost left. If I would have left, none of this might have ever happened. So, that hard work, that work ethic, that staying in the studio, that, like, really putting the hours in, the 10,000 hours in, I mean, that shit is real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Exactly. I want to go back to your debut EP a little bit more, About a Girl. With this being your debut, debut project, I guess, what kind of story, what kind of message, what did you want people to learn about you as an artist with this EP?
Well, I mean, it's obviously super vulnerable and it's very, autobiographical. I think I wanted it to be relatable, that's why it's very specific, but also, it's very specific to me, but it's also quite vague. Like, people can sort of find themselves a lot in the records, I feel. And that's why I didn't want to make it too, like, the title too specific or anything like that. And I think, there's a song on there, for being absolutely in love and being tripping over someone. There's a song over there saying you've had love and you've lost it. There's a turn up. There's a night at the club when you see the one girl. You know what I mean? So I really wanted people to just be able to attach to it in whatever kind of relationship things that they're feeling in their life at the time. Because that, that's the thing that moves us most. You know what I mean? Love and emotion. And I just wanted people to be able to connect to it and be able to hear the songs and feel something.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you're so right with that being the biggest emotion. There's a reason why there are a ton of love songs, because there's just so many different kind of layers to that emotion that you can feel, like you said, over the course of a relationship or something like that.
Right.
So another thing I saw, and we talked a little bit about this, right at the beginning of the interview, before we got started. I'm based here out of Philadelphia. You said you spent some time here growing up. I saw you also spent time growing up in Manchester, England. Just what was it like growing up between those two kind of cities?
Well, I was born in Manchester. I moved to Philly when I was like 4, and then I would go back to Manchester like twice or 3 times a year, just because all my family was over there. I mean, when we moved to Philly, we were only supposed to be there for like 3 years. We ended up staying for like 14 or something like that. So I was always bouncing around. I thought I've considered myself extremely lucky. I think it's important for people to travel and see how, other people live. And I grew up, my parents worked super hard and got us out of a slightly less nice situation in the UK and put us into a slightly nicer situation in Philly. But I always felt lucky that I was able to sort of see how other people live and have a sort of a broad understanding of, how fortunate we were to have a nice life in Philly, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Get to see that other side because sometimes it's like you don't know, how great you really have it until maybe you see some other side where you're like, oh man, I should be more grateful for what I have because things could be a lot worse. Other people don't have these things that I might take for granted.
Right. I think I just think it's something I felt lucky doing. I was always moving. I was always traveling. So I think it's important for people to get around and see the world. You know what I mean? It makes you appreciate what you got way more.
Yeah, certainly. Another thing I saw is that you attended Berklee College of Music. You studied there for a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience studying there?
Yeah, I mean that was amazing for me. I mean, Boston as a city, like as a whole, was huge for me. I didn't have a very good time when I was like 17, 18. I was sort of like struggling with this sort of mental, I was kind of depressed and had a little anxiety, but I didn't know how to define it, and I had a really bad time for a little while. And when I moved to Boston, just getting away from that and seeing that, my hometown in Philly was not the epicenter of the world, and getting away and making friends, that shit saved me, man. So I was able to, Boston has done a lot for me. Berklee specifically as well. I mean, Berklee, I met my manager when I was at school at Berklee. I met some of my closest friends when I was at school at Berklee. Musically, I became a harmony nerd for a couple of years. You know what I mean? And sort of really dove into the intelligence of music and the understanding of music. And yeah, that was all super helpful and super important to me for my development. If I didn't go to Berklee, I don't know if I would be out here in LA. You know what I mean? So yeah,
Yeah,
Berklee was.
yeah, and then moving out to LA, what was that transition like? What was that decision like to say, you know what, I'm gonna really chase this. I'm gonna go after this full time.
Well, I left. I didn't finish Berklee. I mean, as great of a time that I had, and for as much as I learned, I was a fucking terrible student. you know, so I left. Yeah, a couple of my homies were finishing, and they were gonna move out to LA, and I was just like, fuck yeah, if not now, when? I felt like I had, even though I was leaving school, I had definitely learned a lot, and sort of I played a lot, like performed a lot in Boston and things like that. So yeah, I remember I didn't tell my parents. I left. I was supposed to be flying back to the UK for Christmas, and then I was going to fly back in January to start my spring semester, and I didn't tell my parents. I found a sublet for my apartment in Boston, packed up all my shit, and then flew to Manchester for Christmas. And when I pulled up, I was like, I'm not getting on the return flight. I had saved up enough money to buy a one-way ticket to LA. And for 2 months, my mom cried and tried to get me not to go and to stay in the UK and fucking be a plumber or some shit. And I was not having it. And finally, yeah, I think it was like February. She kept me in the UK for like 2 months, but February I finally got on the plane and got out here. And then, yeah, I was just crashing on couches and then ended up sleeping in the studio. And yeah, it was a wild journey, but music was always at the center, and that's kind of the constant that kept me going. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So how long have you been out in LA now for?
It'll be like 4 years in February.
So you've been 4 years coming up now in February. You got your debut EP out. Came out last month. I guess just what is that feeling like? What does it feel like to now have your debut EP out now after these several years working this hard out there in Los Angeles?
A little surreal. I can't lie. A little surreal. I try not to get too high or too low about anything, but it's definitely a proud moment. I think, I don't know, for me, it's always been like looking forward to the next, you know what I mean? I remember thinking like, oh, like when I get my first placement, I'm going to be all emotional. And then you get your first placement, you're like, I want another one, And then I remember being like, when I pen it, like when I signed a deal, I'll be all emotional. And then I wasn't. You just want another one. And it was the same thing with the EP. It was like, damn, this is fucking awesome. When can we drop the next one? You know what I mean? So yeah, but it feels good though. It feels good. It's definitely a proud thing for myself and the team and my family and everything like that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's that always want that next step. You get the one thing, but you're not satisfied. You just got to keep working to get that next thing.
Yeah, I think that's like a subconscious thing, but I mean, no successful person is ever satisfied. You know what I mean? So I think I've always been trying to tackle one obstacle and then immediately, you know, not pat myself on the back, but looking for the next one.
Well, again, a big thank you to Adam for coming onto the podcast. Remember, go down into the show notes on whatever platform you're listening on. There, I'll have links so you can check out his music, that EP, as well as follow him on Instagram for any other things he has planned for the future. With that, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Anything Goes with Jackson Neill podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, make sure to subscribe on your favorite platform so you get the new episodes every single Tuesday and Thursday. Also, head over to jacksonneillpodcast.com. That's where I have the archived episodes for this podcast, as well as my sports and music discussion ones. Also, if you're a really big fan of the show, maybe consider becoming a subscriber over on Patreon. Over there, for just a couple dollars a month, you can get access to cool bonus content from a lot of my interviews here on Anything Goes. Sometimes I ask them, the interviewees, some questions that I don't think really fits in the overall interview, so I put it into the bonus content. You can access that over on Patreon. I write, record, produce, do everything for these podcasts myself as a full-time college student, so any little bit of support just helps me spend more time making these episodes. If you want to stay up to date on everything I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at JacksonNeil20. Today's music is by Analog by Nature with their song CDK Sunday. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you all next time.